In this third part of the lecture, I just want to talk quickly, or introduce quickly to you the concept of design thinking. And for me, I think design thinking represents one of the best examples of how organisations and individuals can really embrace entrepreneurial and innovative behaviour, and how they can ensure that they're able to come up with far more creative solutions to problems. And what we are seeing is that the design thinking has become pretty widely adopted across organisations in Australia and internationally. If you are interested in a little bit more on design thinking, a bit more detail, I'd strongly recommend you to have a look at the course on Lynda. So Lynda is the training arm of LinkedIn. I'd encourage you to have a look at the design thinking course there. You can do it as a free trial, and it's a great way to sort of embrace some of your creative abilities. So when we think about design for innovation, and we think about the critical role that design plays, we need to think about this notion of design thinking. So this is essentially using creative methods to tackle business problems and reframe business structures. So in design thinking, the emphasis is very much on thinking about design, not thinking about the business decisions that come with a product from day one. And it involves a lot of experimentation and play. It involves, coming up with trial versions of the products that we can actually look at and feel and touch as a way of actually seeing whether the product concept actually works. And there's lots of different models of design thinking out there, and if you actually have a look on Milo, I've put up there a good reference for you again, which provides provides a bit of a summary of the current state of play in design thinking, and provides a bit of background about the different approaches. But in its really simplest form, design thinking is a formal problem-solving method that's used to help engage in creative problem solving. And when we think about design thinking, we need to think about the design pyramid, and we need to think about the layers and levels of design that we might see happening in organisations. So at the base we have this notion of design thinking. So design thinking is the dominant thinking style required to undertake design-led innovation processes. So if you're going to have an organisation that has a strong emphasis on design, you need to build the skills of people working in your organisation to engage in the design thinking process. And again, there's formal courses that you can get people to do as an actual way of building that capacity. We then need to think about design-led innovation. Okay, so we need to think about how it is that innovation is driven by this design thinking process. So how do we make sure that we embrace this creativity methodology and ensure that it's the source we go to when we're trying to come up with product innovations? And then we need to think about sitting above that design integration. So design integration is the outcome of design-led innovation processes. So it's basically building a culture where design is at the core of everything we do, and an emphasis on design is really critical. I think what I like about design is that design is all about thinking about outcomes. It's thinking about what the final product is going to look like and function like, and certainly making us, people within the organisation, really think about how it is that a customer might think about a product and interact with a product. So it does produce very customer-centric outcomes for the organisation. And when we think about design thinking, we need to think about the role that it might play in terms of the different types of innovations that we see. And there are sort of 10 different types of innovation that might occur, or areas of innovation is probably a better way to think about this, that happen within organisations. So we might try and innovate in terms of our profit model or our networks, our organisational structures and processes. We might try and innovate in product performance or the product system, or we might try and innovate in things like the customer experience, whether it's around the service or the level of engagement we have with the customer. And so again, design thinking can really help us in all of these different areas of innovation within an organisation, because again, what it does is it says, let's try and build a culture of innovation for the organisation. Let's try and put design and the process of design thinking at the core of how we innovate. So say, for example, we're thinking about the customer experience, and we're trying to think about what they get in terms of customer service. We would use a design thinking process to see if we can reconfigure the service experience. Think about the service experience in a different way, and think about different attributes of the service experience that might work for us as consumers and work for other consumers that are like us. So again, design thinking is really critical at impacting on all of these areas of innovation. And not surprisingly, it's the Scandinavians who've probably been at the forefront in leading design thinking globally. And there's a lot of good work that's done in some of the Scandinavian schools around design as a process within organisations. And one of the models that has been developed is the 4-step Danish design ladder. And it's basically a way of showing how we can move an organisation up this sort of steps, or the stages of maturity, and to a point where design is an integral part of our business strategy. And again, the research does tend to show us that organisations who have taken design thinking to their core do really tend to produce much better outcomes for the organisation. So the process starts with non-design. At the very beginning of an immature organisation, there's no appreciation of the importance or role of design in the innovation process. Then at some point, people in the organisation realise that there might be a role to play for design in product development. And so design in the second step of this process is seen purely about improving the final physical product that we're actually selling. So improving the look and feel of the product. So for example, if you're Apple at this stage, you just think about how visually appealing the product you're developing actually looks. In the third step in this process, design starts to filter down to different levels. So it moves beyond just the physical appearance of the product and starts to impact and be integrated into the product development process itself. And so we start to think about how do we actually use design principles to enhance or improve the way that we design our products. And then in the final stage, or the final step in this design ladder, design thinking filters down to every part of the organisation, and design now becomes a core part of the business strategy, often because it becomes a source of competitive advantage for our organisation. And so really what we need to think about within any business is this process of design-led innovation. We need to think about how design can be integrated into the way that we come up with new products, the way that we change our processes, the way that we manage people within an organisation, and try and enhance the ability of the organisation to engage in this creative design process. And this sort of design-led innovation is critical in organisations of all forms, whether they're large organisations, medium-sized organisations, or small organisations. And what it really does is it really gets us to sort of think about what we can do as an organisation from very different perspectives. And again, this figure that we have here from Bacolo, Wrigley and Matthews sort of shows how design can touch the whole spectrum of everything we do within the organisation. It can impact upon opportunity development in terms of identifying what opportunities might be, and we might integrate that into the way we develop opportunities. It impacts on the strategic and operational activities of the organisation, and certainly impacts upon how we engage with internal and external parts of the business. And so again, this design-led thinking is really being seen as a critical part of growing business development into the future. And again, when we think about design-led innovation, we can see that there are sort of 3 broad stages and sort of 10 sub-stages that we go through in the design process. So the first stage is all about design. It's about understanding. And if you can see here in this figure, we're trying to think about ideas to develop an understanding, because before we can engage in a design process, we really need to have thorough and good information about what's happening in our context. So we understand, we reveal who the stakeholders are, and we try and ask questions about how a product or a service might better meet the needs of a customer. Once we've thought about that design process, we now move into a learning phase. So learning is all about proposing solutions, coming up with ideas about what we might do, and thinking about the assumptions we make about the context in which we're operating. It's about developing prototypes, coming up with a model of what we think the product might actually be trying to sell. It can be about provoking new meaning, so actually creating new ideas or new value with a different type of market offering for a consumer, and reframing these new opportunities into what we can provide in terms of value. And you can see from this figure again in this learning phase, there's sort of a lot of back and forthing and interplay between these processes, and that again is that creative process of work, a lot of trial and error and interaction over time. And then once we come out the other side of that, we then get into an integration process where we've worked out what the new product or service will look like, so we've come to the final design decision. We now need to share that, we need to bring everyone on board so they understand what it is we're trying to do, and then we need to transform, we need to actually develop that particular product. And so this figure provides a really good summary of the journey that an organisation takes in that creative process. And again, there's some discussion of this in the text that I'd encourage you to have a look at. And again, this design-led innovation process can be used in a whole range of different areas within organisations. So it can be used to come up with new business models, so new ways for the organisations to operate and to compete and to take advantage of market opportunities. We can also use this design thinking approach to come up with new methodologies for stakeholder engagement. So not just engagement with the customer, but engagement with all the people of relevance to the organisation. We can also use this design-led process to help realign the organisation's values. So by thinking differently and coming up with creative ideas about what the organisation's role and purpose should be, we're able to come up with different solutions for the future. And we can use design thinking to really facilitate the process of structural change within organisations. So creativity and design is really important for improving the innovative performance and the entrepreneurial performance of any organisation. And so again, if you're serious as an organisation and actually engaging in entrepreneurial activity, I'd really encourage you to yourself, but certainly with the people in your organisation, go through this process of design thinking and think about what design thinking might tell you as an organisation about what you can do in terms of your customers, your organisational structures and the way that you operate. And I think that again, engaging that design process is really critical. Now to understand a bit more about design thinking, I've put a couple of readings up onto Milo for you. There are two that come from a special edition of the Harvard Business Review in 2011 on the design thinking process, and I'd really encourage you to look at those. The third is a summary article, which I've mentioned previously, which provides a good summary of what design thinking is all about and the sort of evolutions of that context. And then there are two important videos there that you might find interesting. The first is a very short summary of design thinking, which comes from Linda. So as I said, Linda is the LinkedIn training arm. And the second is a video about why creativity is important and why boldness is important in the creative process. So again, I'd encourage you to have a look at those. Also, make sure you have a look at the text chapter. I think there's a really good discussion of the creative process and the role that design plays in innovation. As always, if you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to contact me. Apart from that, bye for now.